Every morning, millions of people with prediabetes make the same mistake. They wake up, they try to be responsible, they try to eat healthy, and before 9 a.m., they have already pushed their blood sugar in the wrong direction. Not with cake, not with soda, not with junk food, with breakfast, the meal they trust the most, toast and jam, a bowl of cereal, oatmeal with honey, orange juice and fruit, flavored yogurt with granola, a light breakfast that looks clean, harmless, even disciplined. And then, a few hours later, it begins. The crash, the hunger, the fog, the irritability, the shaking need for coffee, another snack, or something sweet just to feel normal again. Most people never connect that moment back to breakfast. They blame stress, they blame poor sleep, they blame age, they blame their metabolism, they blame themselves. But for millions of adults with prediabetes, the truth is simpler and far more dangerous. Their breakfast is training their body to become diabetic faster. That is what this video is about, because there is one breakfast pattern that pushes prediabetes into diabetes faster than almost anything else people repeat every day. And the reason it is so damaging is not just that it raises blood sugar once, it creates a whole metabolic chain reaction, a spike, an insulin surge, a crash, more hunger, more snacking, more strain on the pancreas, more inflammation, more insulin resistance, and then the same cycle again tomorrow morning, day after day, month after month, year after year. That is how people quietly move from borderline to diabetic while telling themselves they are eating healthy. And before we go further, stay with me, because midway through this video, I'm going to show you the one exception that fools people into thinking their breakfast is working when it is actually doing damage. If you miss that part, a lot of this will not fully click. But first, let's say the answer clearly. The number one breakfast that pushes prediabetes into diabetes fast is this: a high-carb, low-protein breakfast eaten first thing in the morning when your body is already under hormonal pressure to raise blood sugar. In plain English, cereal, toast, jam, pastries, sweet oatmeal, pancakes, waffles, bagels, juice, fruit-heavy breakfast with almost no real protein. Even healthy breakfasts that are mostly starch and sugar wearing a wellness costume. That is the pattern. Not one evil food, a pattern. And that pattern is dangerous because the morning is not a neutral time in the body. This is where most people get it wrong. They think morning is a fresh start, a blank slate, a reset button, a calm metabolic beginning. It isn't. When you wake up, your body is already doing something important. Cortisol is rising. Other wake-up hormones are rising. Your liver is beginning to release glucose into the bloodstream. Your body is preparing to move, think, and function. This is part of the normal morning hormone shift. It is sometimes described loosely as the dawn effect. And one thing that shift does is make your body more likely to run higher blood sugar in the morning than people realize. Now, in a healthy, insulin-sensitive body, that is not necessarily a problem. The body releases some glucose, insulin responds properly, tissues take up what they need, and the system stays relatively stable. But in prediabetes, the system is already under strain. Cells are less responsive to insulin. The pancreas has to work harder. More insulin is needed to do the same job, and glucose tends to stay higher for longer. So what happens when the very first thing you do is pour cereal into that system, or drink orange juice, or eat toast and jam, or sweet oatmeal, or a smoothie made mostly of fruit and sugar? You create a surge on top of a system that was already tilted toward a surge. That is where the damage begins. Now I want you to understand something very clearly. Prediabetes does not become diabetes because of one birthday cake, one holiday dinner, or one bad weekend. It becomes diabetes through repetition, repeated spikes, repeated insulin surges, repeated pancreatic strain, repeated inflammatory stress, repeated signals to the body that high glucose and high insulin are the new normal. And breakfast is one of the most powerful places to create that repetition, because breakfast is not random, it is habitual. People eat the same breakfast over and over, the same bowl, the same toast, the same cereal, the same juice, the same oatmeal, the same healthy routine. That is what makes this so dangerous. A bad dinner twice a week matters. A bad breakfast 300 times a year matters much more. Now let's talk about what this breakfast pattern actually looks like. It is not just sugar. That is too simplistic. The real problem breakfast has 4 features. It is high in starch or sugar. It is low in protein. It digests fast. And it is easy to eat without realizing how much glucose pressure it creates. That is the formula. A bowl of cereal and milk, toast with jam or honey, a bagel, pancakes or waffles, instant oatmeal with banana and honey, flavored yogurt with granola, a fruit smoothie made mostly of banana, mango, dates, or juice, tea and biscuits, orange juice with whole grain toast. A lot of people hear this and immediately say, "But I don't eat junk, I eat healthy carbs." That is where the trap is. Your body does not care as much about the moral label on the food as people do. It cares about chemistry. How fast does it digest? How much glucose does it release? How much insulin does it demand? How long does the blood sugar stay elevated? How quickly do you get hungry again? That is what matters. Now let me show you how deceptive this can be. Imagine 2 breakfasts. Breakfast 1, a bowl of cereal, milk, orange juice, and maybe a banana. Breakfast 2, eggs, plain Greek yogurt, berries, and a few nuts. The first breakfast looks normal, familiar, maybe even cleaner and lighter. The second one looks more deliberate, less exciting, less breakfast-like to some people. But metabolically, these meals do 2 completely different things. The cereal and juice breakfast often drives a fast glucose rise, a larger insulin demand, and a hunger rebound a few hours later. The protein-based breakfast usually creates a slower rise, lower insulin demand, better satiety, and less craving-driven snacking before lunch. That difference repeated day after day changes the body's trajectory. And trajectory is the key word here. Prediabetes is not just a diagnosis, it is a direction. And breakfast can push that direction faster than people realize. One of the most frustrating patterns I have seen goes like this. Someone finds out their A1C is 5.9 or 6.0. They are told that means prediabetes. They get motivated. They stop dessert. They cut back on obvious junk food. Then they decide to clean up breakfast. So they replace eggs or leftovers with oatmeal, fruit, toast, cereal, or juice, because those foods sound healthier. And for a while, they feel proud of themselves. They think they are doing exactly what they should. Then 3 months later, the blood work comes back worse. Why? Because they improved the image of breakfast in their mind while worsening the glucose load in their body. That is one of the cruelest traps in prediabetes. People choose breakfast based on reputation, not response. And when they do that every morning, they quietly feed the exact disease they are trying to prevent. Now let's talk about the morning itself, because this is where breakfast becomes especially dangerous. In the morning, cortisol is naturally higher. That is normal. You need cortisol to wake up, mobilize energy, and function. But cortisol also makes it easier for the body to raise blood sugar. So morning is already a time when glucose regulation is under more pressure. That means a carb-heavy breakfast does not enter a calm system. It enters a system that is already leaning high. For someone with good insulin sensitivity, maybe that gets handled reasonably well. For someone with prediabetes, it often doesn't. And then the pancreas has to respond with more insulin. That matters because diabetes is not just about glucose. It is also about insulin. A breakfast that creates a large insulin demand every single morning is not a harmless routine. It is a chronic metabolic stressor. High insulin encourages fat storage. High insulin tends to make later hunger worse. High insulin often reinforces the very insulin resistance that caused the problem in the first place. So the wrong breakfast does not just make blood sugar worse. It trains the whole system in the wrong direction. Now let's go through the biggest breakfast traps one by one. Cereal is one of the most efficient blood sugar spike machines in the modern diet. It is processed. It is easy to overeat. It digests quickly. It is usually paired with milk, and people often add fruit or juice on top of it. That is not breakfast for prediabetes. That is glucose delivery Toast and jam. People massively underestimate toast because it feels small and controlled. But bread plus jam or honey is still fast carbohydrate, especially when there is almost no protein beside it. 2 slices do more than people think. Oatmeal. This is where people get emotionally attached because oatmeal has such a powerful health halo, and oatmeal is not poison. But sweet oatmeal, instant oatmeal, oatmeal with banana and honey, oatmeal with dried fruit, oatmeal eaten without enough protein on the side, that is often a blood sugar problem waiting to happen in people with prediabetes. At that point, it is not heart health. It is often dessert wearing a health label. Fruit smoothies. Another major trap. People assume smoothies are healthy because they contain fruit. But once fruit is blended, sweetened, and made easy to drink quickly, the glucose load often becomes much harder to ignore. A smoothie made mostly of banana, mango, dates, juice, or sweetened yogurt is not gentle. It is fast fuel. The light breakfast tea, biscuits, fruit, toast, maybe a little juice. This breakfast feels harmless because it is not heavy. It does not feel greasy or indulgent. But blood sugar is not determined by guilt. It is determined by glucose. That is the rule. Now let me ask you something directly. What do you usually eat for breakfast when you're trying to be healthy? That is the most revealing version of your breakfast, not your cheat meal, not your vacation breakfast, your good breakfast, because that is often where the hidden damage lives. Now let's get to the exception I warned you about earlier, because this is the part that confuses a lot of people. Some people eat a carb-heavy breakfast and feel great for a little while, energized, focused, even better than when they eat eggs or protein, and they take that as proof that the breakfast works for them. But that can be misleading. A fast-digesting breakfast often creates a quick surge of fuel to the brain. So for a little while, yes, you may feel alert, you may feel comforted, you may feel more awake. The problem is not always the first 30 minutes. The problem is what comes next. The crash, the cravings, the hunger, the second coffee, the need for a snack, the shaky, foggy feeling by 10:30 or 11's. This is the exception that fools people. They judge the breakfast by the first lift, not the full metabolic aftermath. That is a serious mistake. Because a breakfast that makes you feel temporarily better but leaves you hungry, tired, or craving more sugar a few hours later is often exposing instability, not health. And that instability matters because it drives the next snack, the next insulin rise, the next blood sugar swing. This is how a bad breakfast becomes a bad day, and how a bad day repeated for years becomes diabetes. Now let's talk about the hidden damage beneath the surface. Every time blood sugar rises sharply, the pancreas is forced to respond. Blood vessels are exposed to more glucose, inflammation tends to increase, oxidative stress tends to rise, appetite becomes less reliable. The liver receives another signal that the body is operating in an environment of frequent sugar abundance. That matters, because prediabetes is not just a glucose issue, it is a whole body issue. It affects the pancreas, the liver, the blood vessels, the brain, appetite regulation, energy levels, inflammation. And breakfast can touch every one of those systems before most people have fully woken up. Now, some people hear this and immediately jump to one conclusion: so I should just skip breakfast. Maybe, sometimes, but not automatically. I do not want to replace one simplistic rule with another. Some people do better delaying breakfast. Some do better eating earlier. Some tolerate breakfast well if it is built correctly. Others get into trouble if they skip and then overeat later. So today's message is not that everyone must skip breakfast. The message is much more precise. If you have prediabetes, the worst breakfast pattern is one that is mostly fast carbohydrate, low in protein, easy to overeat, and eaten into a body that is already hormonally primed to run high. That is the pattern to break first. Now let's talk solutions, because fear without a practical replacement is useless. A blood sugar-friendly breakfast usually has 3 things: enough protein to stabilize the meal, a much lower load of fast-digesting carbohydrate, enough satiety to keep you steady for hours, not minutes. That might look like eggs with vegetables, plain Greek yogurt with berries and nuts, cottage cheese with cucumber or tomatoes, an omelet with mushrooms and spinach, avocado with eggs, plain yogurt with chia seeds, Leftover fish or chicken if that suits your appetite. A protein-centered breakfast with a small amount of slower carbohydrate if your own body handles it well. Notice what these breakfasts do not do. They do not flood the bloodstream. They do not rely on juice. They do not build the meal around cereal, bread, or sweetness. They do not create a fake sense of healthy while quietly demanding a huge insulin response. And perhaps most importantly, they often reduce the need to snack later. That is a clue. If your breakfast is making you hungry again 2 hours later, your breakfast is telling on itself. Now we need to talk about liquid sugar, because this is one of the fastest ways people sabotage themselves in the morning without realizing it. Orange juice, apple juice, sweet coffee drinks, sweet tea, breakfast smoothies, natural juices, bottled wellness drinks. These beverages often feel healthy because they came from fruit or are associated with breakfast. But in prediabetes, liquid carbohydrate is one of the quickest ways to spike sugar because it requires almost no chewing, moves fast, and often provides much less satiety than the glucose load would suggest. Then people stack it with cereal, toast, oatmeal, or fruit. That is how breakfast turns into a metabolic ambush. Now let's talk about the word fast in the title. What does fast really mean? Not overnight, not in 1 week, but much faster than people expect when the same breakfast pattern is repeated daily. A1C rises through repetition. Insulin resistance worsens through repetition. Pancreatic strain accumulates through repetition. And breakfast is one of the easiest places to build that repetition because it happens every day and often looks the same. That is why changing breakfast can create an outsized improvement, not because breakfast is magical, because breakfast is repetitive, and repetition is what changes biology. Now here is something else people need to hear. Many people with prediabetes are not eating irresponsibly. They are eating the wrong pattern. That is different. You can have someone who avoids dessert, rarely touches soda, hardly ever eats fast food, and still keeps getting worse because every single morning begins with cereal, toast, juice, fruit, or sweet oatmeal, and almost no meaningful protein. That is why this conversation matters. It corrects one of the most dangerous misunderstandings in modern health advice. Foods associated with healthy people are not automatically healthy for insulin-resistant people. Those are not always the same thing. Now let me give you a practical 7-day test. For the next week, remove the high-carb breakfast pattern completely. No cereal, no juice, no toast and jam, no sweet oatmeal, no pastries, no granola-heavy yogurt bowls, no fruit-only breakfast. Instead, eat a protein-centered breakfast that is lower in fast-digesting carbohydrate. Then pay attention to 3 things: your glucose readings if you track them, your hunger by late morning, your energy and cravings through the first half of the day. Do not judge one morning. Look at the pattern, because patterns tell the truth. A lot of people are stunned by what happens when they stop starting every day with sugar and starch. They stay full longer. They stop thinking about food every 2 hours. Their late morning cravings soften. Their energy becomes steadier. Their glucose readings get less chaotic. And for the first time, they realized the breakfast they trusted most had been working against them. Now let's address another objection. What about whole grains? Whole grains are not the center of this discussion. Context is, if something is technically whole grain but still creates a large glucose load in your body, at the wrong hour, with too little protein around it, the label will not save you. Again, the body responds to physiology, not slogans. That is the core lesson. Prediabetes turns into diabetes faster when people keep eating according to food reputation instead of metabolic response. Now I want to close with something important. You do not need to become afraid of breakfast. You do not need to fear all carbohydrates. You do not need to hate oatmeal forever. You do not need to punish yourself for every choice you made before you understood this. What you need is a more honest picture of what your body can handle now. Because once prediabetes begins, the rules change. The breakfast your body tolerated at 30 may push you in the wrong direction at 50, 60, or 70. That is not failure. That is physiology. And physiology can be worked with. So let's bring it together. The number one breakfast that pushes prediabetes into diabetes fast is not one magic food. It is a pattern, a high-carb, low-protein breakfast eaten first thing in the morning when your body is already less insulin-sensitive and more likely to run high. Cereal, toast and jam, sweet oatmeal, juice, pastries, fruit-heavy breakfasts with almost no protein, all the meals that feel light, familiar, and healthy, but hit the bloodstream fast and demand a large insulin response. That is the breakfast pattern that drives the disease forward. And the most deceptive part is that it often feels responsible. But the body tells a different story. If this is you, the good news is simple. This can change, not because of a miracle, because the trigger is clear. When you stop teaching your body the same damaging lesson every single morning, you stop pushing the disease in the wrong direction. And that matters. What do you usually eat for breakfast when you're trying to be healthy? Write it in the comments. I am genuinely curious how many people are going to realize that the breakfast they trusted most may have been the very thing quietly worsening their blood sugar. If this helped you, share it with someone who has prediabetes or keeps saying, "I barely eat anything bad, so why is my sugar getting worse?" There is a very good chance the problem is not their effort, it is their breakfast pattern. And one more thing, this is general educational information, not personal medical advice. If you have diabetes, prediabetes, kidney disease, or take glucose-lowering medications, talk with your doctor before making major changes. The goal is not to guess. The goal is to understand your own pattern and act intelligently. Take care of your mornings. Because for many people, the road from prediabetes to diabetes does not begin with dessert. It begins with breakfast.